Recognizing the impact of the trauma we are all feeling and the unique challenges it poses for leadership of our organizations, our opening plenary today focuses on leadership during crisis. We are very honored to have with us Dr. April Naturale, Vice President of Disaster Services at Vibrant Emotional Health, who helped lead the New York mental health response in the aftermath of 9/11. And Rabbi Menachem, Creditor, Scholar in Residence at UJA-Federation. We hope to have time for a couple of questions at the end of both presentations. April?
Thank you, Shoshana, and for the invitation to be here today. It really is an honor and a privilege. I am very, very sorry that this is happening to you and to your loved ones, to your community, and to our world. This is what we call a shared trauma, similar to 9/11. We feel each other's pain. I have a lot of information to share with you, but not a lot of time, and you have to connect with the rabbi, so I'm going to try and be very focused. And there's a lot to talk about when we talk about trauma. But for you here today, as Shoshana and I talked about what might be most meaningful to you, I certainly hope it is, and that we will have time for some questions later on. But I want to talk a little bit in general about traumatic incidents, right? There are many different types, from interpersonal, individual violence like robbery and rape. These things are hard to recover from, to mass violence events, shootings in public places and schools, terrorism, and, of course, armed conflict, war, which is where we are today. These events have occurred since time has been recorded in different countries, in different populations with different ethnicities, over land disputes mostly, reputations, historical conflicts, religion, and other varied ideological reasons. But through all of these traumas, there is a sameness. Dr. Fran Norris, the researcher of disasters across the world, tells us that the sameness is our human response to trauma. I'm sure that you've heard of a lot of these. Fighting, right? Fleeing, freezing. We never know which we're going to do, which is somewhat problematic. But in addition to that, fear is fear. And grief is, in every country, in every language, across the globe. And the sense of loss is the same, as is joy. We certainly hope to have moments of that in between these events as well. One of the lessons I took away from 9/11 is allowing ourselves, and especially our children, to have moments of that, even in these traumatic events. I've seen family members lose loved ones in terror attacks and wars. I've worked in 12 different countries and trained about 250 humanitarian aid workers working with folks who are victims of war, terrorism across the globe. Military men, child soldiers, most missing a limb or having had their eyes gouged out and forced to participate in the type of moral injuries that we used to call unmentionables. And now, unfortunately, we're seeing and hearing about them on the television every night. I don't know about you, but I have a hard time even thinking about turning it on anymore. We can see and feel each other's pain. And once you witness another's fear and pain, you know that we're the same. We come from human species. And so this is a shared trauma for all of us. Now, there are a lot of common responses to traumatic events, and I think it's really important to note that we're not talking about post-traumatic stress disorder here. Research is very clear. Most people don't get PTSD unless you're a soldier in war who stays for your whole life and is always being threatened with your life ending. But for the general population, in every population across the globe, most people don't get PTSD. It's an important thing to note, because if you think you have PTSD, you're going to do more poorly than somebody who thinks, I can get through this. We may experience a lot of the distress symptoms, but most of these are human responses to a horrible event. We used to say it's a normal response to an abnormal event. I like to think of more common, because certainly trauma shouldn't feel normal to us. These symptoms include, number one, sleep problems. We hear about in every single person I've ever met in every country, sleep. How many people have sleep problems? You know, right? Either trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. Headaches and stomach aches that have no physiological reason. After 9/11, the downtown health clinics spent tens of thousands of dollars on CAT scans and MRIs, trying to figure out why all these folks had stomach aches and headaches, but they didn't have any disease process. Panic attacks, not unusual at all, right? The rapid heartbeat, we all know that one. Jumpiness, being hypervigilant, maybe even paranoid to a certain degree, thinking somebody's following you or somebody's after you or something bad is about to happen. Something bad is going to happen. Numbness sometimes, crying and sadness, and a lot of fatigue. Trauma is exhausting, absolutely exhausting. And these symptoms will come and go, likely for a long time, especially as the war rages on and losses continue, as we've heard today. You may even feel like you're at square one every time you hear the news. Again, though, these symptoms are not likely indicative of a mental illness, but a response, a very human response to a traumatic incident, a horrible, life-threatening event. So when we talk about trauma responses, most people assume that we're talking about emotions, but the reality is that trauma starts in the brain. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. The trauma, actually, the thoughts come first. And so the trauma actually becomes a cognition before we have our responses. It becomes our way of thinking, right? If I think you're a danger, then the trauma responses are going to come. But the thought comes first, even if it's just a microsecond long. It becomes a perception, and this controls everything that we do afterwards. And it's actually where the trouble begins, because once a human perceives a trauma or a threat to themselves or loved one, things happen in the brain that actually direct your responses, but at the same time, it shuts down your ability to think clearly, to make decisions, and to use good judgment. I have a great article that talks about this, and I won't tell you the whole thing, but the title really says it. It's How Stress Makes You Stupid. You know, it's kind of a fluffy title to make light of it, but it's actually the truth. It's a long 10-year study of thousands and thousands of people about how stress can make you impaired. Probably about a third of the population becomes impaired. The even larger problem is that you don't know your brain isn't working. You think it is. I hear this all the time. I send people out into the field, whether it's in a war zone or a disaster zone or a terrorist attack. I've done all 15 of the mass shooting events in the country in the past 5 years. I have been the person on the line, sending in teams and going myself to do the needs assessments and to work with the families. And what I hear all the time from people who are super stressed out is, I'm fine, I'm fine. And the research tells us you are most likely not fine. I've had project directors, doctors, psychiatrists, doesn't matter, emergency managers, whose thinking is so off after even a few days in the field, often after being there for a couple of weeks, that I get calls from the staff that are working with them from all different layers, the people who work under them, the people who work over them, saying, something's really wrong here, right? And I confront them, and what do you think they tell me? I'm fine. Right? I had a woman who was a psychiatrist who I sent into the field. She was there for about 3 weeks in the military base when we brought in the Afghan guests after the war. And I got like a lot of phone calls by the third week. She couldn't think straight, she couldn't follow direction, she wasn't sleeping, and she had no idea. And I called her and she said, I'm fine, I don't know what they're talking about, I'm fine. And I said, you know, you're wonderful and thank you, you did a great job, but you know, there'll be a car for you there at 7 o'clock, take you to the airport. No, I'm not leaving. This is not a request. You need to come home. She called me every day for 2 weeks after that. Just a point to make that people think they're okay, right? We want people to get stabilized and allow their thinking brain to come back on again. So in the trauma field, we have a rule that no one works alone. One of the wonderful things about a community like yours is that you know that this is a really smart rule, right? You get it. Everyone, though, even the leaders, work with 1 or 2 trusted coworkers or work buddies, and they reinforce in each other the need to stop, the need to slow down, and when making decisions, to check in with each other and make sure their thinking is clear, grounded, and checked. Making decisions with input from each other is critical. So when those of you here in this, one of the most important movements in the country, in the globe, actually, I meant to say, when you hear and learn about this information, as well as, information not only about the brain, but about the heart, when you're informing and teaching others about these trauma responses to this war and to other traumatic events, you are the leaders. After 9/11, we had a brilliant guy in the New York State Office of Mental Health. I ran Project Liberty, the 9/11 response to the event, and Joe Lazar was leading the New York City Mental Health Office, and he told me, you have to give lots of money to key Jewish organizations because they're bringing up leaders in this world. And they weren't licensed mental health agencies, most of them, but they were doing the grassroots community work that was more necessary than anything else we were doing. And so we, in fact, did that. Probably one of the best things we've done. You become leaders. Know that people will see you that way. They will listen to you, whether you're a formal leader or an informal leader. When you share important information like this, people will respond. So you want to make sure that people know, yes, everybody is affected. If you weren't, I'd be more worried about you, right? I think you were like a psychopath and didn't feel anything. But that doesn't mean that you have a mental illness. Maybe you have some moments of sadness or moments of depression or anxiety or different symptoms that come and go. Again, it's a common expected response. The point is that no one should work alone, suffer alone, respond, or lead alone. Continue working with each other. It's one of the most important things that you all can be doing. Make sure you're slowing down, even though you think everything has to be done yesterday. Checking in with each other and checking in with yourself. All the time, you're going to become a pain in the butt to each other, right? How are you sleeping? When was the last time you had something to eat? Are you drinking enough water? How are you managing today? When you do this, you allow your brain to start working properly again. That's what it does. Allowing you to be clear, use good judgment, and make good decisions. These are the things that are impaired when you're experiencing severe trauma like this. The other rule is that when your working buddy tells you to stop, that you need a break, or that your thinking is off, you do not argue. Nope, don't want to hear it. The agreement is, I had a psychiatrist scream at me a couple of weeks ago, I don't need a buddy, I'm a psychiatrist, I've been working on my own for 20 years. I pulled him out. He's a great guy in many ways, and I hated to do that, right? But he was going off by himself. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody knew how he was doing. Nobody was checking in with him. He wasn't being part of the team. I pulled him out. He will not talk to me anymore. Okay, this is how important this rule is. If your buddy tells you you need a break or that your thinking is off, you do not argue. You excuse yourself and move to doing something that will help get your stress hormones out of your body so that your brain can start thinking properly again. The experts at the National Center for PTSD tell us that the activities are simple. You know, I'm a clinician. I can do what I call the alphabet soup of therapy. EMDR, CBT, EFT. The research is through the roof that none of that is as effective as social support. None of that is as effective as social support. So, you give yourself, we call it self-care now. It really is a very technical thing that you're doing. You're getting stress hormones out of your body. And there are simple ways to do it that are not therapy. Number one is breathing. I'm a shallow breather, so anytime I talk to people about breathing, you'll see I start to actually breathe. You should know some kind of a breathing exercise, and it doesn't have to be a big deal that you are embarrassed about or you do in front of everybody. Do something really simple. I like the 3-5-7 method, right? You sit there quietly. Maybe you're at your desk or you stand and you breathe in to the count of 3. You hold it for the count of 5. And you give a big release to the count of 7. And that pushes you to do it again. At least 3 times, you'll start to get some really good, healthy endorphins in your brain and get it working again. And know something that you can teach the kids, too. I always tell the kids box breathing because it's easy to remember. It's 4 by 4 by 4 by 4, right? You breathe into the count of 4, you hold it for 4 seconds, you exhale for the count of 4, and then you wait for 4 more seconds. You should know these things and practice them. The second thing is stretching. Stretching gets stress hormones out of your body, right? The hippocampus is here where everything builds up, and we don't go out chopping wood and running away from the saber-toothed tiger anymore, so everything stays in our body, and we need to get it out. Whether you do yoga or trauma yoga or old-fashioned stretching, it's a really healthy, no-harm thing to do as long as you're doing it within your ability. And the last thing is basic exercise, walking. Walking in nature is especially good. Music is emerging in the field as well, right? Stress makes you stupid, Mozart makes you smart. You have some music on in the background. But remember that you want to be responsible for your own behavior. You are not the super person in all of this. I thought I was after 9/11. I thought it was so cool that I only had to sleep 4 hours a night in the first 6 months because I'm like a 9-hour person. And my body was so pumped up with adrenaline. I was like, woo, great. Come home, have dinner, sit at the computer till 2 o'clock in the morning, get up and leave the house at 6 o'clock the next day, do it over again. At the 7-month point, I got up out of bed one day and I came out of the bathroom. I know that now, but when I came out of the bathroom, I really didn't know whether I was going into the bathroom or coming out of the bathroom. I had a freeze response. And I looked across at the bedroom window and I could see that there was light there, but I went, I have no idea what month it is. I stood there for 10 minutes. I had no idea what month it is. I said, oh, that means I don't know how to get dressed. Oh my God, how am I going to take the bus? I lived in New Jersey. How am I going to get on the bus and try to get around? I can't think straight. I was one of those people who used to do mnemonics, could do like maybe 20, 25 people and remember names. I have totally lost that since that day. So like nobody's a super person. We need to be able to de-stress, to take care of our bodies, and most important, as leaders, to make sure your brain is working. So, be a leader. War itself is egregious, and it's a moral failing on the human condition. It's been with us forever. And this one's tough. It's not going to go away soon. But good decision-making and good leading at this time is critical. Not only for you and your families, but for the globe. So I thank you for listening, for your leadership, your advocacy, your caring, and for your hearts and your thinking brain.
Thank you, April. Hi, everyone. My name is Menachem. I work 2 floors down. Thank you for inviting me to my office today. I want to start with where I thought I was going to end, and this is very much my attempt to measure up to Dr. Naturale's expertise. I don't come at this with a clinical approach, but so much of what she said, I think, resonates with what I was hoping to say as well, which makes me feel better about my plan. When we say Am Yisrael Chai, it's a peoplehood proposition. It's a global statement. But it's impossible to imagine that the Jewish people is alive and will live if we as individuals within that community don't. So I just want to ask you to take that in, even if you already are teaching it to your movement, to your group, to yourself, to your family, to your students, that Am Yisrael Chai is a very personal statement. We know that in our pain. But as a promise we make moving forward, it can only be true in that larger sense if it is true on a personal level. And so whatever you need for your own chaim force, for your own life force, that is a gift to the Jewish people, because the work you do, the work we do, matters so very much. I know this is obvious, but so is breathing. A lot of this has to become a decision we make until it becomes something automatic again. As Viktor Frankl, the father of logotherapy, taught us, between stimulus and response, remember he's saying this as a survivor of the Shoah, between stimulus and response there is a pause. In that pause there is a choice. In that choice lives our freedom. I don't need to name the stimulus for all of us right now, nor the epigenetic trauma that for so many of us we carry within us that October 7th activated. Not only that, when we have been successful at teaching our people's history, we begin internalizing the best and worst moments of it. And so even if you think you don't have epigenetic trauma, the triggers in terms of consciousness when it comes to Sephardi history or Ashkenazi history or specifically Israeli history, ancient history, we mourn the temple in our bones every summer. That was a long time ago. But this pulled me into that. I'm ancient. We all are. One way or another, we are. And I used to think in the holiday that we commemorate during the summer, Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, there's a strange tradition, in addition to not eating and not drinking and not anointing oneself and washing and being intimate, there's another tradition to not ask someone how they are. I have always taken that very seriously, but I used to think it was a rule that you're not supposed to ask someone who they are. But after October 7th, as soon as I saw someone else's eyes, I realized it wasn't don't ask how they are, it's there's no need to ask someone how they are. Of course, we should. We should check in with each other. But I know how you are. Am Yisrael Chai. I'm reaching for that. That's how I am. That's how I say it. So what I'd like to do is share just a bit of thinking. It's going to be too much material. There's no test. There's no test except are you breathing? There's no test except will you take care of yourself because you matter. Recently, my wife, Neshama Karlbach, has put on concerts as a gift. She's donated time and organizing capacity for communities around the area. Many, many people have shown up. And I've made it a point, because she allows me to say so during her concerts, any Jewish leader in the room, will you please know that we see you? And I ask them to rise, professional or volunteer, do you know that we see you? Because so often the work that we do is unrecognized. And so too, therefore, is our pain. We're a room full of those people. Instead of asking you to stand up and be seen, I just want you to know, first of all, that I see you. And I'm humbled to be in your presence. But I'd ask you to look around the room because, as April said, we can't do this alone. The good news is we're not, even if we feel so alone so often. So really, I'm just asking you physically, look around the room for a second. People you know, people you don't, all of our broken hearts are in the same room. That broken heart, that is a collective truth for the Jewish people, Homia, yearns for the East. So I'll also tell you that a week after October 7th, 2 weeks after October 7th, was my son's bar mitzvah. And we had this conversation in my home. What do we do? I'll tell you the answer not using my family as the example. When I was just in Israel, I returned a week ago, having brought 29 rabbis and Jewish leaders from New York with UJA. We met a young chayal named Yonatan Peretz. You might know his father, Rabbi Doron Peretz. Yonatan was in full uniform. He's been on the front in Gaza, but he doesn't have to be, technically. Why? Because his brother is a hostage. And when you have a family member who's a hostage, you're exempt from obligatory duty. But he had to go. But there was another challenge. He was scheduled to get married 2 weeks ago. So he asked his bride-to-be, and he asked his parents, and he asked her parents, what do we do? Should we cancel this for now? And the answer from them was, you get married. And under the chuppah was Yonatan Razel. Some of you know the musician, thank God for music, singing under the chuppah as Yonatan and his bride, I forget her name, and I apologize for that, were walking down the aisle, and he sang his very famous melody that 10,000 of us sang this last week on the streets of Manhattan, V'hi she'amda lavotenu v'lanu. If you know the song, you know. Maybe you can imagine, maybe we just can't imagine the power of walking down the chuppah to the words we say at Seder. In every generation, someone has tried to hurt us. And regardless of your theology, thank God for the diversity of this room, regardless of what you believe about God, there's something greater than the self that we have always believed in, be it each other, be it destiny, be it our chosen fate, be it our purpose in the world. Imagine walking down the chuppah to those words, praying for the release of your brother, which, by the way, that's what we're doing today. That's the necklace that's on your table that I've been wearing. They were sold out in Israel. Halev shalanu shavui ba'aza. Our heart is captive in Aza, and in English, bring them home now. I wear it right next to the charms that my wife gave me when we got married. It's a second marriage. We have 5 children, so I wanted to wear all of them around my neck. But now I wear all of them. My biological children, my stepchildren, and all of our family's children and grandparents, including my friend Vivian Silver. Some of you might know Vivian, who's held hostage too. So what I want to do is offer a few models. You know, Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory once said he learned Talmud until he realized that the Tanakh was a Jewish book too. Right? Some of you who've studied in yeshiva understand why that's actually really funny. Because in Talmud, you use biblical verses to get to the Talmud. You never read them in context. And in his study of the Torah and Tanakh, which of course he had already studied quite a lot, he began to uncover what the rabbis were responding to, because often, so often, in all of the teaching, at least that I do as a rabbi, I say, oh, after the destruction of the temple, a new kind of Judaism was created, but I never actually think about the trauma that entered the experience of the Jewish people in 586 BCE and in 70 CE. And out of that trauma came incredible growth and creativity. It doesn't mean we left the trauma behind. But the decisions that our ancestors made in those days might not have made us unified all the time. But look at this room. Look at what the world reminds us. I'll get back to David Hartman in a second, but one of the senior fellows at the Hartman Institute, Yossi Klein Halevi, just today, in a podcast with Ezra Klein, said, October 6th, I was really worried about us because we were at each other's throats. But October 8th, we were holding each other up. They misunderstood what October 7th would do to us. Let us never forget how important we are to each other. Let us never forget that Am Yisrael Chai is a promise our ancestors taught us to make. Here are a few biblical models, not from Rabbi Hartman, but in the spirit of what he shared. I'm going to give you a lot. Choose your own adventure. Here's one. Moses. When we go wrong at the golden calf, and God gets angry and says, Moses, get out of my way, I'm going to destroy them and start again with you. Remember Moses' response standing in the breach? You can't do that, God. And if you do, mecheni na mesifrecha, erase me from your book. One response to this hardship is, I'm just done. I'm done. I can't. By the way, in the end of this list, I'm going to say all of these emotional responses, especially in the immediate, are completely understandable. It's not that one of them is more right. It's not that I'm advocating for any of them. I'm just talking about the ways I have felt on the ground, sometimes numb, often angry, sometimes so sad, actually all the time so sad, sometimes prayerful, sometimes inspired, sometimes exhausted, mostly exhausted. But Moses' response is, I just can't anymore. Now, it's defiance, but it's also just too much. You can't be God, and I be me, and we be us, and this be the world. It just can't. Here's another one. Aaron, Moses' brother, when his children die. And again, we can talk about the text in more depth another moment. In Parshat Shmini, in the book of Leviticus, when his children Nadav and Avihu die in a way that makes no sense, rabbis struggle to make sense of this, but it makes no sense. Moses tries explaining the pain, contextualizing our trauma. You know what Aaron does? Vayidom Aaron. Aaron is silent. Some people think his silence is acquiescence. Some people think his silence is just he's struck, unable to speak. There's no answer. Contextualize our pain. How dare you? How dare you talk to me about the roots of this? I'll show you images that can't have any contextualization. I'll share with you testimony that the library in Israel, the National Library, is beginning to archive testimony of the survivors of Be'eri again. Moses, too much. I'm done. Aaron, I can't. I don't have words. How about Avraham? You could choose which Avraham you want. Avram at the binding of Isaac? I don't know what to do with that one. I don't know what to do with any of these. Avraham, when God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Amorah because they are cruel. I'm going to destroy Sodom and Amorah because of their cruelty. Avram haggles. He engages. And then he says these words, Chalil alach, shame on you, God. Chol, that's not holy, God. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, the judge of all the earth won't be judicious in the exercise of justice. This is so hard. I'm not making political comments. I'm just in pain. And I'm looking to our tradition to give me something to hold on to here and there. Just a confession. I've been so rigid in certain moments. You know, some of you know my politics. I founded a group called Rabbis Against Gun Violence. I don't sound like me recently. That's fair too. Not mad at me. I just don't understand me. And therefore I can't make good decisions right now. I have to be humble in my fierce rage and sadness. And I'm proud of Tzahal. I'm so proud for the restraint that they are showing. Because were it not for the restraint they were showing, it would be a very different picture. And the world is trying to gaslight me into thinking that I should be ashamed of my humanity. How dare they? Who isn't struggling right now? So those were a few men in Tanakh. Here are a few women. And then I'll close for now. Not that I have any ribbon with which to tie this. When Sarah, who's been promised so much, suffers seeing Avram have a child with someone else, and I can't compare these stories, but I also can't imagine what it is to be Sarah. The possibility of a hopeful future makes her laugh. It's absurd. I can't do that anymore. I don't have any of that kind of life in me, says the text. Explicitly, physically. She laughs. Chana, similar struggle, promised a child loved so much by her husband, and yet, so what does she do? She prays, but she innovates her spiritual practice. If you read Shmuel Aleph, first book of Samuel, she's the first to pray silently, and no one understands what she's doing. She takes a quiet moment between her and the universe and pours out her soul, and someone thinks that she's drunk. A religious leader misunderstands prayer. I've seen plenty of religious leaders who are struggling for their own prayers right now. One more. Ruth. Book of Ruth is all about loss and what happens after. Aviva Zornberg, a biblical scholar, suggests that Ruth embodies the kind of stickiness. In fact, the word devek, glue, comes from the very idea that's in the book of Ruth. She sticks to the future. She sticks to her former mother-in-law. She sticks to the covenant that she married into. She sticks with a future that is so uncertain, takes her from a place of loss and barrenness to a place of strange possibilities. And from her we have, according to the tradition, the possibilities of the Messiah. Here's what I mean to say with all of this. I have no idea how to deal with any of this. But the Tanakh and the text, which is the space between you and me right now, and the text, which is the thousands of miles that we cross in an instant every time we think of Israel, right now, and the journey that we all must be making, going to Israel frequently, starting right now, mindfully, safely, and bringing people along with us. Because when I was in Israel, just in the south, didn't go as far south as we had intended because it wasn't safe at that moment. So we went right next to Yam HaMelech, the Dead Sea. And we were a group of diverse rabbis who never, ever pray together because we don't pray the same way. But here we were with our displaced sisters and brothers, 200,000 displaced Israelis. I just brought a group to the border of Ukraine and Poland, but I brought the same stuff with me for our internally displaced sisters and brothers. How shocking. There we were standing on the beach watching this group of kids sing to Omer Adam. It was fascinating. This weird moment. And we're standing by the beach, we're going to pray, and along comes two older women wrapped in towels because they had just gone swimming. And they're looking at us. And they're, just imagine, their faces are looking like, right, people who look like one kind of Jew and people who look like another kind of Jew bowing near the water, like what's happening? And so it was my humble pride, like this moment, to say to them, Anachnu kvutza shel rabbanim, we're a group of rabbis, banu bishvil tmicha, we came to show you support. And they both burst into tears. You have to show up, because no one expects you to right now. You have to show up. We have to show up. No one expects us to. Am Yisrael Chai is a promise we have to make again. Close with one more thought and then I'm done. I know I've said that 3 times, but that's what rabbis do. The final morning that we were there, we were only there 2 mornings, the final morning. Some of you know the name Rena Quint. She is an incredible, eloquent, powerful human being, a survivor of the Shoah, made Aliyah years ago. Her book, her memoir is called My 5 Mothers. I think it's 5, might be 4, but still it's a lot. She sat with us to tell her story, and in her language she talked about being a survivor, and then she used the language of the new survivors. I know we've been using that language, but I want you to hear it in Rena's voice. She talked about the survivors of Be'eri, the survivors of Kfar Aza. And then she talked about hostages. And she described a young man named Hirsch Goldberg Poland, whose parents were right here, standing at this podium, just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Sometimes I don't know. She talked about him because he had a recognizable injury. I won't burden us with a reminder of all of the images, but it's noticeable. She didn't know that the next people walking into the room were Rachel and Jonathan, Hirsch's parents. And so to my left was sitting Rena, I was facilitating her conversation, and then to my right sat Rachel and Jonathan. And they looked at each other. And the space between them spanned all of Jewish history, speaking worlds of knowledge and wisdom I don't want to know, but I do know. As much as I can know, I do. And that's one of the things that binds all of us. So how to lead in a time of crisis? Who knows? But I will tell you that the ancient rabbis had an idea, spoken from within their own traumatic time, b'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel liot ish, in a place where people aren't being human, be a human. That sounds like leadership to me. In that moment, sitting between Rena and Rachel and Jonathan, I was just struck by Rena's use of the language of survivor, and honestly, the look on Rachel's face, her eyes, Jonathan's closed eyes when we were all praying together and singing. And it made me recall a midrash, a legend that some of you might know, the name Serach bat Asher. She's named in the book of Genesis when Jacob and the family go down to Egypt. And then somehow she's named in Exodus when we are liberated. That's 400 years, and she's named in both moments. So the rabbis enjoy such a strange textual reality. and tell us a story about Serach Bat Asher, who lived the entire time and was the only way that those of us who left Egypt knew how to fulfill the promise we made to bring the bones of Joseph with us. We promised Joseph not to leave his bones. Only Serach knew where they were. And I looked at Rena, and I looked at Rachel and Jonathan, and I realized you have to live a long time to know what it is to keep a promise. I want to bless us in the most burdensome, but also, I hope, comforting of ways, which is we should live long, full lives. Our children and grandparents who are in harm's way and held hostage should be gifted by God and by our furious work to live healthy, strong, safe lives. We should remember, this is a blessing. Am Yisrael Chai is not just a wonderful song my father-in-law wrote for the Soviet Jewry movement. Am Yisrael Chai is a promise we have to make again, like we've never made it. Am Yisrael Chai begins, at least for me, every day, with my hand on my heart, reminding myself that my heart is beating and I can breathe. And I have a world that I could not possibly have done enough to earn. The beauty of just one more day is more than I could ever ask for. So the question the great Rabbi Mary Oliver, she's not a rabbi, the great Rabbi Mary Oliver asks us is, what will you do with your one fierce life? And my answer, and I invite you to share it with me, is Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi Creditor and Dr. Naturale. I'm going to actually ask you both to come up. I think we have time for one or two brief questions. If anyone has a question, you can direct it to either or both. Please join us. Are there any questions? David? Give them a second.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentations. A lot of us work with very small organizations, with very small staff. And the point you made about making sure that no one's alone really hit home. How can we support those people when they don't have that staff? They don't have the buddies, they don't have that organization.
Mm-hmm. I'll just start off by saying I pray a lot with my, my eyes closed and, let me say the right things. Let me try and be there. We do things virtually. All the staff check in with each other. There's no hierarchy. That helps a lot. And we also put peers together so that if there isn't a supervisor or a leader with them, that they can check in with each other. There's a lot of resistance, I have to tell you. I can imagine as many of you in the room, you start working, you don't want to stop doing this work. I'm needed. This is hard. Everybody's working hard. I can't take a break. I'm fine. I make a set of rules. I call it a pacing program where we really implement and that people have to take breaks. They cannot do certain things alone. I always think that I'm going to wind up closing down the agency because, I have people doing a lot of self-care things and checking in with each other, and we have flourished, and I just have to trust that. And we have to start somewhere. The idea of being human and saying to people, they're sitting there, I've never seen before in my life until I met child care workers in the welfare system in this here and in other states. They sit at their desk, eat their lunch, drink their coffee, don't take bathroom breaks. The biggest complaint I've heard from welfare workers when I ask them anything, what is it, the biggest? They won't take a bathroom break because they won't walk away. So I think we have to say to them, you have to do this. And I always think that the work is going to fall behind, and it doesn't. We flourish and we have more work than usual, and the work gets done, and we remain human.
Yeah, I'll only add, from specifically a Jewish standpoint, though I know it's not exclusively Jewish, denominationalism and organizational difference is a luxury of peacetime. It shouldn't be hard for us to come together the way that we are. And I know AZM works so hard to hold the different kinds of people we are with our political differences, our religious differences. But actually, the question is answered really well by a movement A movement means inherently something bigger than my brand. It's not, it has to be my brand and therefore I can be part of it. It's the mission is bigger than my specific slice of the pie. And I actually think that that is a comfort, I hope, at least for me it is, when I am together with people with whom I wouldn't ordinarily spend time and find something comforting about their very presence. It takes a lot of work on both parts when it's two people who don't agree. I mean, Rabbi David Wolpe says it right. He says, Jews don't typically talk to each other, they wait their turn. And I think that that's true about the way that we conduct business sometimes, but it's unacceptable. And it's especially unacceptable when it comes at such a severe human cost. A lot of us do our work with small staffs. It's really important for us to see that small staff as part of a bigger staff. Yes, I work here in this building, and we have a large staff. But actually, I feel, and I think a lot of my colleagues would say this too, that we work for a mission that's even bigger, much bigger. We are part of this together, and if my colleagues were in this room, I think they would take great comfort from knowing that our work sustains a space that brings together all of you. So I think to know that the work is bigger might sound like more of a burden, but actually, being part of a movement responding to a true, large, global need that happens to be our tribe's welfare at the moment is a great gift, because then I'm not alone. I'm not on a team of three. I'm a team of all of us.
I like his answer better.
No, I like yours. Yours is good.
Do we have another question?
Right over here. Oh.
Along the lines of not being alone.
Here's a mic.
Along the lines of not being alone, what if we established a digital hub where each of the small organizations could have access to available resources that some of the larger organizations have more than enough of? And that would give a deeper base and a wider base, and we wouldn't be up until midnight making posters and signs if we had proper access to better technology, to more informed technology, to the 8-year-olds who know computers better than the 68-year-olds. And to be able to plug into resources of each of us for all of us.
Amen. I'm assuming everyone in the room heard what you said, and the answer to the question has to be from within the work that connects this holy group.
I'm told to say who I am. I'm Maxine Dover, and I am the founding director of the Friends of Or, which is a movement of the Druze community, the Or Foundation, which has changed its mission in these weeks to serve as a resource for the Border Patrol and the soldiers in the north, and for families from Sderot and Ashkelon.
Wonderful. One point to add to that is to not be discouraged if you create that and it's not utilized as much as you think it would be, because what we know is just the perception of support is actually almost a little bit slightly in the research, slightly statistically more significant than actually getting support. And so knowing that it's there, and if I think I want support, the way I think about it, I'm going to get exactly what I need, right? But maybe I talk to somebody and I don't get exactly what I need. So the perception, it being there in and of itself, can be really helpful. And I'm sure it'll be utilized. Just the point of don't be discouraged if it takes a while for it to build and be utilized, because people get discouraged and they think, oh, we're going to shut this down. Nobody's using it. I think you'd be surprised the effect that it can have, and especially over time then.
We've got somebody over there.
This is almost, I guess, a segue from what you just finished with, but I'm Charlie Niederman. I'm representing ARTSA, and in my synagogue, we had someone in leadership really overreact, just completely lost it. I'm sure she's recovering from that, and I'm sure a lot of us want to be empathetic toward her. How can you show empathy in a way that it can be accepted?
I'll go first because there has to be a clinical response to this one. The rabbis say you shouldn't try to appease someone in their time of anger. And I think that is really important to know, that there are times where we can't possibly be empathetic in a way that we want to be, both because maybe we can't and also maybe it wouldn't be able to be received. But I would say, what I said to that group of rabbis who were praying near Yam HaMelech, near the Dead Sea, was we should forgive each other more quickly than we usually do. Not all of our commitments will be made, but we know we're all praying. So maybe it's possible, and I don't know in the circumstance that you're naming, to be compassionate and to be forgiving. Not to be accepting of that person's opinion necessarily, but to be accepting of that person as a human being. There are lines sometimes that we do need to draw when it comes to the limits of acceptable discourse. I've been trying to navigate this personally recently. But that doesn't mean that I can't see a human being as a human being in pain. And so if there's a way for people to reach out, maybe their close person. Actually, you know, the example in the Talmud that comes to mind is when Rabbi Eliezer, you might know this, it's a famous text, famous to weirdos like me. When Rabbi Eliezer is put into excommunication, is put into cherem, the rabbis wonder who is going to tell him, because he's in very significant pain, and he's very powerful. His reaction could hurt things, and in fact, it does. So they send his most beloved student, who has a more tender way of expressing it. So maybe within communities, when someone is in acute pain and distress, we can be thoughtful and say, who would be the most gentle presence for them, and when might make sense. Showing up for them, whoever the them is, should be showing up for us, knowing the care that we would hope to receive.
Thank you. That's a hard act to follow. But yes, there is a clinical response. I said kind of jokingly that one psychiatrist, you know, he hasn't come back. But the others do, because I do remember to try and come, as you're saying, from a place of love and concern. And I've learned that to first start with, we thank you for your service and for what you've done. And this does happen to people. Try to normalize the fact that it's the trauma. They're not a bad person. They didn't do anything wrong. They're having a traumatic response. You heard the rabbi say several times there are things that he's struggling with. And hear that they're struggling with and thank them for their service, for what they've done, and give them time. Most of the folks who do have trouble that I've taken out of the field, they'll join one of the webinars that talks about what happens in the field when you get overstressed, and they'll then witness to other people. So it may take a little time, but coming from a place of love and concern, it's the way to do it. It's the only way to do it, and I think most people will respond to that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naturale and Rabbi Creditor, for helping us with your framing and your insights and your learning that will help us navigate our new world.